Hello, good afternoon and welcome to this Causeway event, Growing Our Cities in the Climate Emergency. I'm delighted to welcome you to our most ambitious Causeway online event so far. We had 125 people registered and people joining the webinar as we speak, literally. My name is Eugene Mullen. I'm a founder and director of Causeway, and my day job is an architect and urban designer and director at Smith Scott Mullen Associates in Edinburgh. This event brings together three great interests for me: four cities that I know and love, the role of urban design and planning in tackling the climate emergency, and the power of collaboration. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Our thanks to Jacobs and the Edinburgh Centre for Carbon Innovation for organising the event. Causeway has a core objective to protect and enhance the trading relationship between Scotland and the island of Ireland. No matter the political or economic landscape, it's about providing an informal business platform that allows business to connect, communicate, and collaborate. It's a non-profit, membership-based organisation which launched in Edinburgh Castle in 2016. Our events attract members from across Scotland, Ireland, and Northern Ireland, as well as our dual membership with the British and Irish Trade Alliance. So Causeway is a platform for growing opportunities and connecting business. And the unique attribute that runs through people in Scotland and Ireland is our willingness to talk and do business in the right way, even in a fun way. There's truly a strong sense of partnership, shared ambition, and a very similar trade, industry, and cultural focus. What is absolutely key to our success over the last 4 years has been simply people. It's these people that make business easy. You can find out more about our network and how it could benefit your business on the events page of our website, where you will see photographs from many of our events, including ones that we have held in Belfast City Hall, Glasgow City Chambers, the British Embassy in Dublin, and the City Chambers in Edinburgh. These four cities are core to the Causeway objectives. Our thanks to both the Scottish and Irish governments for their financial support, and we are delighted to be joined by John Webster, the head of the Scottish Government Office in Ireland, and Jane McCulloch, Consul General of Ireland in Scotland, who have both been great supporters of Causeway and are going to say a few words. So if I could just pass over to you, John.
Thanks, Eugene, and thanks for that introduction. Also, just like to say a few words of thanks again for the work that you and the team at Causeway do to support Scottish Irish relations. As you say, this is a collaborative effort, and without the help of networks like the one that you drive forward, the relationship wouldn't be half the success it is. Also, before I start, a word of thanks to Stuart, David Ferry, and the team at Jacobs who have supported today's event. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's a very positive and constructive development. Now, what I've been asked to do today is set the context from a Scottish Government perspective. I know that Jane's going to follow me and do the same from the Irish Government perspective. For that, I thought it would be helpful to focus on three areas very briefly. First, Scottish Government action, their position on climate change, and where we are on that. Scottish Government's plans to steer recovery from the COVID crisis, and setting those two in the Scottish-Irish context. Now, I've only got 4 or 5 minutes, so I can only skate over what are very complex issues, but it will hopefully help with some of the headline context for today's discussion. Now, on the first, climate change, it's not news to anyone that tackling climate change has been and remains a top priority for the Scottish Government. The 2009 Climate Change Act, adopted by the Scottish Parliament, set a target for reducing carbon emissions by 42% by the year 2020. That's a target we've already exceeded. The new ambitions set by the Climate Change Emissions Reduction Targets Scotland Act in 2019 set a target date for net zero emissions of all greenhouse gases by 2045. The mission is that Scotland's contribution to climate change will end definitively within 1 generation if we follow that target. In order to do that, we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions through a just transition to a net zero economy. and society. We're driving Scotland's adaptation to climate change, supporting decarbonisation in the public sector, engaging with business and industry on decarbonisation as well. And we're listening to the people of Scotland through the big conversation and encouraging individuals to move towards a more low carbon way of living. International action on climate change is also a top priority, as is supporting communities to tackle climate change through the Climate Challenge Fund. And lastly, supporting developing countries to tackle climate change through our International Climate Justice Fund. Now, none of this means that there is complacency. There are massive challenges ahead, and the need for innovative thinking and transnational collaboration has never been greater. The onus is also on our cities to adapt and develop policies for smarter, more sustainable living. And that's never more important than it is now as we consider how we need to change and adapt to live with the COVID virus. I know that our cities have an interesting story to tell on this today, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Susan Aiken and others as we move through the agenda. It would be wrong not to cover the global pandemic. Response and recovery has and will continue to consume resources and energy. Governments now have to confront changed realities and operate in a highly pressured fiscal environment. The Scottish Government is no different, and the scale of the challenge is daunting to say the least. But it's also an opportunity to reset, and as we recover, to renew. The Scottish Government's approach on this is focused on 4 phases, 4 Rs: response, reset, restart, and recovery. Response to COVID-19 has been the overwhelming priority. The focus on protecting lives, critical national infrastructure and services, businesses and household incomes. That continues to be the #1 priority for our First Minister. As we ease restrictions, we begin to reset, which is about reversing the practical impacts and implications of COVID-19 and laying the groundwork so that activity to restart the economy can begin and progress unhindered. Restart is about ensuring we learn from the reset and that we are guided by fair work principles in supporting to re-emerge, but also that we're able to help workers upskill and retrain to adapt to new working environments or to different activities. That last R speaks more to what we're talking about today, and that is recovery. That's about looking forward. It's about preparing industry for a post-COVID future. It also means developing greater resilience, building and strengthening our local systems. It means embedding greater innovation and use of data and new technology into our economy, our competitiveness. It's about embedding our long-term goals into the way that our economy rebounds and builds forward. That means a green recovery, it means a fair recovery, and it means that both are built on inclusive growth and well-being economy. We're now somewhere on the path between immediate crisis response and restart. And the First Minister is today, in fact, I think that's pretty much now setting out in further detail the Scottish Government's plans for easing restrictions and restarting the economy and society. I think inevitably this is going to require a recalibration. What we thought was a priority may no longer be important. How we think about collaboration and indeed competition may have to shift and adapt. Questions of how we trade together, invest in each other's economies, how we develop supply chains together, and the way we measure success both economically and societally are challenges that we're all facing. And we need to think about how and when we confront them together and collaboratively, how we share experience, exchange good practice, and learn best practice from each other. Scotland and Ireland have made a lot of progress on that in recent years. I think it's fair to say that the bilateral relationship is perhaps in better shape than it has ever been, and we're looking to the immediate future together. Both governments have undertaken a review of the bilateral relationship, and we hope to report on that review later this year in a way that will set the course for the next 5 years of the relationship. Now, I'm not going to prejudge the outcome of that review today, but what we do know is that the linked challenges of how we respond to and recover from this pandemic and how we continue to build fairer, more equal and sustainable societies and economies are factors that we will reflect on as we produce recommendations from the review, which we hope to bring forward sometime in the autumn. The fact that our cities are also thinking about the challenges they face and share, and the way they can work together to confront them, is hugely encouraging for us all. This is work that the Scottish Government supports. It's work that my team and myself will continue to support in our relationships with Causeway, Jacobs and our partners in the 4 cities. It's important that we learn from each other and that we continue to challenge each other to do better. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today, and I'm really optimistic that resulting from today, areas for practical collaboration can be identified, meaning this is the start of a process and a discussion and not an end in itself. Thanks, folks.
John, for that, and I'll just pass straight over to Jane.
Thanks, Eugene. And I'd like to echo John's thanks to Jacobs, ECCI and to Causeway for the opportunity to take part in today's event. And just to note and to acknowledge Causeway's adaptation over recent weeks, it's been really impressive. And I hope that it'll open up new opportunities for the network. And of course, we'll continue to support you in that. Today's event is an example of the innovation and collaboration that we all have an interest. I hope that within the next couple of hours, we'll have reached a rallying call to action, having been inspired by successes, challenges, and the ideas that we hear shared. Earlier this month, in its work on cities, policies, responses to tackling coronavirus, the OECD noted that the COVID-19 crisis may provide an opportunity for city dwellers and planners to rethink drastically from the ground up their consumption, production and travelling paradigm. Central to this is implementing the Sustainable Development Goals at a localised level, as we can see is a priority for both governments. We know how crucial cities have been to the immediate and drastic response required to protect their people over the last couple of months. And I'd like to acknowledge the 4 cities represented here today for what has been achieved in that. What happens next is both a collective challenge and a collective opportunity. And now that everybody's day-to-day expectations of how we all live have shifted, I hope that there's a new appetite to address our city's challenges. In Ireland, the recommendations of the OECD on inclusive, green, smart cities are in line with our approach in the National Climate Action Plan and the National Development Plan, with a focus on regional cities, brownfield development, and the Urban Regeneration and Development Fund. Although we await our new government, it's clear that these issues are only gaining in importance, and I would anticipate that this work would be strengthened and prioritised. I'm very struck by the scale of the opportunity here. It can be very easy to focus on the negativity of a challenge, on obstacles, resistance to change, or cost. But we've just hurdled all of these at a national and city level at an unprecedented pace. Granted, some of these hurdles were jumped, if not in the dark, not in perfect light, and not all decisions have been made without mistakes. But to slightly repurpose Sligo's Mike Ryan of the WHO, if you need to be right before you move, you'll never win. So we have a unique opportunity here. Like, can we define the status quo now? And if we can't, then our point of departure is naturally redefined, possibly somewhat undefined. So much of the work on adaptation, whether practical, behavioural, technical, is in train and groundbreaking. We have a very special collective in these 4 cities and their wider regions. And let's put that to good use and our shared collective benefit. This forum, facilitated by Causeway, Jacobs and ECCI, has great potential, and I really hope that we all use it well.
Jane, thank you very much for that, and to you both for your insights. It's great to have that government support for an event like this. The bilateral review obviously provides a great opportunity for this future relationship. And we very much see this as the first event in a programme which will lead to practical benefits and improvements for hopefully all 4 cities. And now I would like to introduce Stuart Turnbull, Director of Transport and Planning at Jacobs, and also a member of the Causeway Management Board, who has been the driving force behind the organisation of this event. Over to you, Stuart.
Afternoon, Eugene. Just picking up the introduction from Jane and John and yourself. I mean, I think the whole ethos behind this event was to bring the 4 cities together, working with national government, academics, industry and society, and really sort of see if we can do something to actually create an action plan. This is the whole point of this, is it's not a one-off webinar. It's the start of a series of events to get the cities working together to tackle the huge issues around climate emergency and the more recent devastating impacts of COVID-19. So that's the purpose. It's the start of an event, start of a programme. We'll cover more of that towards the end. But really, in this, the point of this event is to try and identify some common themes, some common challenges and opportunities between the 4 cities. And therefore, the structure that we're going to run through today is there'll be some presentations up front from some of my colleagues at Jacobs and ECCI, just to set the scene for some of the sort of global challenges that we face. Short presentations from on businesses and the role of businesses in addressing the climate emergency, and then we've got a panel discussion with representatives from the 4 cities. So you'll get introduced to the various members of that as we go forward. I've managed to stop all these slides from speeding on, as you may have spotted earlier on, so hopefully under control now. This first session then is, I'm going to ask the speakers you'll see on the screen here to one by one to come forward and just give a few minutes on some of these challenges. Just a couple of things before we kick that off. You'll see those that are on delegates, you'll see there's a panel on the right hand side that's got a chat, question, and polls and people function. Throughout the course of the event, we'll post a number of polls just to get some thoughts from the audience on certain topics. There's a couple just about to come up, just trying to understand where everybody's from in terms of geographically and what industry you represent. So the first one's just popped up there. So you'll see those, and the little red dot will appear on the polls as they appear. The other thing is that we've got some questions for the panel that will be coming up shortly, but we're keen to get any additional questions from the audience. So again, there's a questions tab. If you want to ask a question of the panel, it's anonymous. The facilitators will see the questions being raised, and we'll introduce those into the panel discussion later on. So I'm now going to, without further ado, pass you over to Ed Craig and Jamie Brogan from ECCI to start the first of the sort of more technically focused sessions. So over to you, I think, first, Ed. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Can everyone hear me? Am I coming through okay? Fantastic. My name is Ed Craig. I've been with the Edinburgh Centre since the beginning, and I'm briefly going to introduce take you through our work in Edinburgh. But I had the pleasure in November in launching the Centre for Carbon Innovation in the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador at COP in Madrid. Not that we would know what the situation we would be in from January, February onwards. And I just want you to picture for a second as a start, imagine if your city or if your region had 85% of your income turned off like a tap, which is what happened to the Galapagos Islands, which was that dependent and that non-resilient and based on tourism for its survival. 85% lost, and 1,200 miles from the Ecuadorian coast. We have a centre now in the Galapagos, and we've been investigating new business models and ways to link the COVID crisis along with the climate crisis. And it's been incredibly encouraging. And I want to use this building on what John and Jane were saying, that we should look not just about the linking of COVID and climate together, but also this as an opportunity to share our models to come through this aspects. And we have shared the 4R strategy with the Galapagos, and I'm greatly heartened by the way the Ecuadorian and Galapagos Island government have been responding. So with that, we're all in it together, which I believe is a theme that Jamie is now going to take forward, not just locally in Edinburgh, but our 4 cities, but also globally.
It's almost impossible at the moment to talk about anything in the context of climate change and COVID without, well, it's almost impossible to talk about anything just now without talking about COVID. I don't know if it's too early in the day to start making jokes about climate, but the point I'm trying to make here is a serious one. The global response to COVID has shown that we can make changes to our day-to-day lives and to our economies, and that were unthinkable 3 months ago, and at a pace that were unimaginable. And the net effect of that, though, on our, despite all of the changes, the disruptions we've seen to our day-to-day lives, to our economy, are, depending on which projections you believe, a 4.5 to 8% reduction in CO2 equivalent emissions, which are projected in 2020. To put that into context, meeting our global targets and our global ambitions and our city ambitions for climate change require a 7% change, a 7% reduction in our emissions every year until 2050. So what we think has been a seismic shift to how we operate requires to happen every year between now and 2050 if we are to meet the recommendations made to us by the IPCC. In that context, organisations, the people you've heard from, cities, countries are looking at how we can drive a green recovery from COVID. I've recently set up and now run the Edinburgh Climate Commission. We have just published our principles for what that green recovery are going to look like today, actually. And rather than talking through all of that, I've posted those in the chat on the sidebar, and you can have a look at those and come back with comments on them. But they echo what a lot of other organisations are saying, that, you know, the new society, we can't just build back to business as usual. We need to involve local communities. We need a fairer society, and we need to lock in some of the positive behaviour changes as we've seen, but also lock out some of the climate impacts that we used to have pre-COVID. Just to set that in the context of some work that we did in what seems like another time, i.e. pre-COVID, this is an overview of Edinburgh's emissions footprint in 2019. You probably can't see some of the detail on it, but basically what it shows is that Edinburgh's emissions are split broadly between domestic, commercial, industrial and transport. And the big impact from COVID will have been on transportation. The others, particularly domestic, remain quite obstinate in terms of changing those and getting those emissions on a downward trajectory without significant intervention. And that's the opportunity all of our cities have, and I would like to see us moving forward on together. So I'm going to give you a couple of quite detailed slides, which I won't go through in a lot of detail. What I want you to take from this is that 56% of the net zero target for Edinburgh by 2030 can be achieved by making an investment that pays back on itself in 7.5 years on commercial terms. It creates over 7,000 jobs. It delivers savings to individuals, businesses and communities across the city, and it delivers social, environmental and economic benefits as below. It requires a city-wide investment. That's not just public investment, it's a city-wide investment from individuals and businesses of about £3.8 billion. Now those are huge figures, but I would challenge anyone to find any infrastructure project anywhere that gives you that kind of payback over that kind of period at that kind of scale. Your alternative, if we're going back to business as usual, is to leave ourselves on the current trajectory where we get some reduction in emissions just from the decarbonisation of electricity. We get very little return on investment. We don't get any of those other benefits. Just to put a bit of detail on that, and I am conscious you won't all be able to read this slide, we'll share them afterwards. The work that we've done looks at two things: the most carbon effective measures and the most cost effective measures, and it matches those up so that you can look at where that city action plan needs to be. Now, we've already started doing some work with Belfast around that. This is based on a model we've worked in Leeds before, and we're looking to run that out over Edinburgh in the next couple of weeks, couple of months. And it shows, that there are tremendous opportunities if you can support the change that's required, particularly in domestic heating and domestic insulation and domestic energy performance. I'm going to hand back to Ed. There's some quite technical detail in there which we can share reports about. And as I say, I've shared a link on the Edinburgh Principles, which will, I hope it present a bit of a call to action to everyone on this call to say how they can contribute and how it affects them, both as citizens and as organisations.
Okay, so to summarise, Edinburgh obviously has a unique opportunity through the PCAN project, which is working with Leeds and Edinburgh and Belfast to really clearly economically identify the advantageous policies and activities to mitigate the impact of climate change. Also, I would strongly recommend, if you have time, to read even the summary of the Stiglitz and Stern report, which identified the 5 key areas we believe we could be working through if we want to guarantee and not retard progress towards successful activities towards climate change, which includes investment in clean physical infrastructure, building efficiency, retrofitting, and clean research and development. We're delighted to be part of this partnership with Causeway and Jacobs, and we look forward to your questions later in the later session. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi, Stella Whitaker here. I'm the Technical Director, Sustainability and Climate Change in the Manchester office of Jacobs, and a bit of a specialist in climate change, sustainability and circular economy. Just, can you all hear me? Fine? Yep. So I'm just going to run through a few ideas and a bit of an introduction around growing our cities circularly. This is a new area, not a new concept because it grows on other concepts that are sort of very well established, but it's a new area that's gaining a lot of momentum internationally. So what is circular economy? And I apologize to those of you who are listening that know a lot about circular economy, but this is taken from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We're really lucky to have the thought leadership on circular economy basically being led in our part of the globe. And I'd invite you all to go and have a look at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website and all the fantastic resources and see all of the companies and governments that have all signed up to that initiative, and even join up and join their circularity measurement initiative. But a circular economy is one that's restorative and regenerative by design, and I think it's really a concept that's really appropriate for our post-COVID and all of the thinking that we've just had relayed to us around what could our recovery look like. Where should we be focusing effort? We do have a real emergency ahead of us, not just in the climate emergency, but also in resources and resource use, and the effects of our excessive resource use on the natural environment. which all in turn is actually creating the climate emergency. So we really need to shift the system from where we are now to something that's restorative and regenerative. But how do we do it? It's fine to talk about it, but actually, how can we make that shift? So we've been working with companies and cities and jurisdictions and developers alike to apply the principles of circular economy to the tasks at hand. And it can be used at any of those scales. And I'd say that basically one of the really great strengths of the circular economy approach is that it uses these three principles. So, and the principles guide and can become criteria and can become parts of the measurement and assessment, which really sort of get you to think very differently. And in all of our work with different clients, we found that looking at the circular economy approach and the principles in particular really helps people and puts some meaning around systems thinking. And they really grasp it and with a lot of enthusiasm. And I've seen creativity and co-creation through these processes at a phenomenal rate in quite a short space of time, using these elegant principles, which are regenerating natural systems, designing out waste and pollution, and keeping products and materials in use. And that latter one, keeping products and materials in use for as long as possible and at their highest value possible. So that, and all these principles work in tandem with one another. So I'd invite you to think about, you know, what would happen if we were in our cities designing out waste and pollution, so it wasn't a problem in the first place. If we were keeping products and materials in use, if we have looked at the system, what are those products and materials that would give us the maximum value that we would be able to keep in use for as long as possible? And if we were regenerating natural systems, what if we could provide the development and the progression that we wanted, but we were replenishing our local systems as much as possible? There are lots of benefits to a circular economy, and there's lots of studies that have been done. A European Union study recently estimated that 1.8 trillion could be generated in the EU by adopting circular economy principles. And a recent ING report estimated that any entity, any jurisdiction could increase economic output by 4% by adopting circular economy benefits. But there's a few listed here in terms of resilience of the system to shocks, but also climate resilience, enabling sustainability, building markets, saving costs. If you're talking about materials and use of materials and using them really effectively, we're talking about at an absolute minimum cost savings and increased profits. So there's many benefits to taking a circular economy approach. There's a few leading cities, and again, apologies for those of you who've heard a lot about some of the leading cities, but Circular City Amsterdam was basically launched about 5 years ago, and in fact the Netherlands have a target of circularity, 50% circularity by 2030 and 100% circularity by 2050. Really bold, really ambitious programs. And this diagram shows one of the neat things that's really important to do in this work is to map those flows. So what's coming into the city? What materials is the city using? What sort of products is that generating to? What services and functions within the city does that contribute to? And then what wastes are produced? I hate the term waste, or what wastage is produced, or unproductive use. And as you can see from this diagram, you can't see the detail of it, but a very small percentage is getting circulated back round. And all of the studies that have been shown have shown that there's no more than sort of 10% of all resources are actually being recirculated, either within an entity or within a city, or there's been a global assessment that's been done by a group called PACE, which is Partnerships for Accelerating Circular Economy. And they've shown that 9% of global resources are actually circulating back round. So given how smart we all are and all of our capabilities, surely we can see that that's not a very good percentage and there's lots more to do. So Circular Amsterdam, they're the first city to pronounce themselves to going towards circularity. The work is basically also ties in with the donut economics that they've also adopted. And they've got two priority sectors. So one is in construction and the other is in organics and in food. They have some real drivers and constraints in the city, and they're turning those through taking a systems approach into opportunities and taking a really bold agenda. It's probably also worth me stressing that the bolder the agenda, the better the benefits that flow. We do a bit of an exercise with cities and entities. We've been doing some work with a couple of water companies to actually scope out what circular economy can mean to them. And we've done this in cities and basically scoping out across materials, water, energy and restoration. What does that actually mean? What does that, and we change this into we statements, like we recycle all materials, we use reverse logistics, we put people at the centre, we prioritise public transport. So you can see some of the things in there are really common to other agendas. But what the circular economy approach does is it gives you a way of systematically looking at all those aspirations, and it invites you through looking at the principles to really relook at the systems and how we're going. And then some new ideas come to the fore, or some ideas that were there that were just too unpalatable or seem to be too difficult come right to the top of the agenda. There's a really, really compelling case with the valuations that are done to support the work and the benefits quantification to show that it is worth progressing and re-evaluating how you're delivering water to the city. So for instance, when this work for a water utility, the most circular thing that a water utility can do is reduce the demand for water. And coupled with that, to make sure that water is being used at its highest value for as long as possible. And what also comes to the fore is tackling leakages as part of that sort of most circular thing that a water utility can do. We have actually sort of done some work with Edinburgh City Council on circular economy, and we did some similar mapping and looked at what were some really circular initiatives that could be used in Edinburgh. So what has all this got to do with climate change? It's got a lot, and I'd invite you, and I'll send the link to a really great piece of work that was done by Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which looked at completing the picture and looked at how circular economy can actually amplify the response to climate emergency, because it's taking that systems approach to emissions reduction and moves beyond that linear extraction model. And I think the most compelling thing that came out of that work was that they did some empirical work and showed that 50% of emissions reduction will be achieved through our traditional methods. And that's most of the things we've heard about today. But there's 45% of all the remaining emissions that are in our products and entrenched in the systems and in our ways of doing things. So it's only by actually transforming and looking at those. So looking at the rates at which we use assets and materials in our buildings and vehicles, and looking at the materials that go into making the system, looking at the food systems and making sure that's regenerative, and looking at designing out waste of all those materials, energy, water, organics, along the whole value chain, and sequestering, say, carbon in soil to avoid those emissions. So finally, a couple of things. Circular economy can be applied at any scale. So so this Causeway cities can apply it at the whole of city scale, but they can a neighbourhood or on a particular assets or any project or organisation. And when we're looking about construction and reimagining post COVID, I'd really just one slice just to put it into some flesh and detail around the concept would be to look at circular construction, and this starts right from the design brief. So basically, when we're looking at construction, can we be thinking about rethinking the whole system? Can we put in a piece of work on anything that we're looking at and look at circular approaches before we set out the design brief? If we have got the design brief, can we design for reuse? Can we design for optimization, so longevity, adaptability, assembly and disassembly? Can we look at standardization and longevity? And can we look at different options of servicing and leasing and multiple uses? And can we design and construct responsibly? So there's a great guide that was done by the UK Green Business Council, which looks at construction and circularity. But I think even that takes a narrow view of circularity. It doesn't expand it out to water and energy and all materials in the city. So hopefully I've given you a bit of a flavour of circular economy and circular cities, and hopefully we can be looking at Causeway cities and at a four-way bold circular economy vision for the 4 cities. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody. So I've got 5 minutes to talk about tackling carbon across our 4 cities in Causeway alongside COVID. So don't expect everything in this 5 minutes, by the way, but this is going to be my big challenge of today. So my name's Steve Horrocks. I'm Divisional Director in Jacobs on Energy and Carbon, and that's consulting in those areas. And just flick. As I mentioned, just looking back at the last 10 years, I think that most cities around Europe have been on this sort of glide path that has been reducing their emissions year on year, basically. And this has been supported by a whole series of investments in things like carbon management, energy efficiency techniques, things like LED lighting, and also over that period, quite forecast energy pricing was going quite high. These are all the kind of the key issues that we're going to face going forward. So if you look at Belfast, Glasgow, Edinburgh and Dublin, they've all been on that glide path. However, it's fair to say that actually I think we've all had the kind of the benefits of meeting the low-hanging fruit, really, that I've just talked about. So going forward, we're in a position whereby we've set our carbon targets across the cities and nationally, and we're going to go from basically a glide path to what I consider to be a bit of a roller coaster. And if you look down below at Manchester has set science-based targets to reach their what they've gone with a 2038 target for net zero. But also following Stella's position on Amsterdam, I just incorporated Amsterdam as well. And as you can see, I know it's challenging to see that in the graph, but actually we've gone from a fairly sort of shallow path to something of quite significant reduction, which picks up the point that Jamie made earlier with regards to what we need to do in terms of the percentage decrease in emissions year on year. We recognise that every city is going to have its own nuance. So whether it's heritage, social aspects, with poverty, affluence, but also the geographic location of each one that enables them to have different solutions for different challenges. And also each city, we're going to have different ways in which actually they're going to meet this challenge. So, for example, Amsterdam have gone very much around a sector approach. Manchester is looking at what the economic benefits of doing this. You've got other, there's a World Economic Foundation Helsinki challenge that has been created to actually, it's a million euros to find the solution to decarbonize Helsinki's heat over the next 10 years. So some of this is quite innovative. Now, if we move to the next slide. So we have these significant challenges. And I think the point I want to make here is that, so the Committee on Climate Change has been advising the UK government over the last however long, and more recently it's been focused around how we're going to get to 2050 now and net zero. So we have this combination of things that are very much continuing the direction of travel that we're going. So it could be switch outs of heating systems to air source heat pumps. It can be energy efficiency and continuing energy efficiency. But we've also got to look forward in terms of how we innovate technically around coming to a smarter energy systems, looking at things like hydrogen, heat networks, and actually making sure that we don't forget about investing in those sort of big innovative areas that is going to meet that need as we move on to the kind of the latter half of this decade and into 2030. And it's imperative that we were able to sort of maintain that flight plan that we set out. John mentioned earlier about I think it's in Scotland. So the 4 hours that in Scotland didn't include reboots. So sorry, John, I've added reboot to your list of hours for this problem. And I think from my point of view, I think whilst we have gone through this period of significant amount of focus around climate change, starting with Greta and the declaration of emergencies that we've now got within all our cities, enacted into legislation through the Climate Change Act and climate action plans, we now have a period whereby we can actually reboot, which is ironic given my Wi-Fi is not rebooting too good. And that gives us an opportunity, I think, which what Jamie picked up on. So in terms of that reboot, there's a whole area whereby we need to take from projects, programs, policy, this idea that it has to be transformative. So we've got to think transformatively. We've got to enable the politics and the policies to be transformative. We've also got to accept that it's going to be complex. So as we start integrating the multi-vectors of power, heat and transport into our cities, we've got to recognise that that's going to require a lot of effort, but also they've got to be coherent. Now, just picking up on the point I made earlier about innovation, I think one area of innovation for the Causeway cities is around potential for hydrogen. Now, with the curtailment of wind and the wind deployment in Dublin, the opportunities of the marine, but also the northwest of England, hydrogen could be a really good opportunity for both decarbonisation of heat, shipping, HGV, and so on and so forth, with regards to our zero energy and zero carbon strategy. I'm going to move on now because I think my Wi-Fi is cutting out. But yeah, I'm happy to pick up questions.
Hello, everybody. Now, can you hear me? Just want to check because it sounds awfully silent. So I'm the Director of Geodesign at Jacobs, and in that role, I'm the Global Technology Lead for implementing geodesign across the company. And to get started, what I've heard so far in these conversations this morning, there's the need to take a systems approach to understand urban metabolism, to track metrics, whether they be the SDGs or LEAD or something else, but to take a data-driven approach to planning, whether it's projects, policy, or programs. So geodesign is actually a method for doing that. And so I'd like to cover that rather quickly. So geodesign blends the science of GIS with the art of design, enabling participants to objectively look at what the world, is as it is, or as it could be. So kind of what if scenarios. We're basically talking about intelligent values and data-driven scenario planning. And I propose we need to rethink SMART, blending high-tech with low-tech solutions, technology with green infrastructure or nature-based design. And we can use geodesign to provide holistic approach to planning and design, balancing quality of life indicators that you see at the top of this little pyramid here, like safety or access to parks or transit or jobs or carbon reduction, and do it in an equitable way. And if we get that right, we will have the economic, human, and natural capital necessary to be able to bounce back from stressors and shocks related to climate change or pandemics alike. And to give you a quick example of what I'm talking about, this power of this integrated planning and design, or iterative planning and design, we can consider the interplay of walkability and public health. We know from numerous studies that urban design directly impacts public health. And if we build walkable streets, it promotes active living, which improves health. But there are many other co-benefits to be had from good street design. As you improve the street with shade trees, medians, and bike lanes, you improve air quality, reduce water runoff, and increase safety, which increases walking and improves public health. So these co-benefits of one design intervention creates these positive feedback loops on the others. And technology can help us measure those co-benefits. So in order to make this kind of intelligent scenario planning possible, we need a common data environment up front, a federation of servers that allow each department within a local government or within a federal government or national government or an organization. But this federation of servers would allow each department or organization to share important data with others. This kind of federated model breaks down data silos and increases efficiency, effectiveness, and productivity. An added benefit is increased transparency and trust, because none of this is going to be easy. And we need to develop defensible, data-driven decisions that we can share and back up, why we're doing what we're doing. And it also becomes a framework for civic engagement as well. And on the right, you can see these little drawings here. These are actual 3D models that show you the thematic representation on the left and the realistic presentation on the left and the thematic representation on the right. So you could actually look at the impacts of your designs. And to show you what this looks like in practice, the Enfield Council is putting this to good use at a Meridian Water redevelopment project. It's a 200-acre redevelopment in North London, and they want 10,000 homes, 6,000 jobs, and they have this vision of a park at your doorstep and mixed use and animated streets and a place to make and create. So these pragmatic targets and these 3 simple vision statements demonstrate how their vision can become a reality through simulation, providing residents with equal access to parks, transit, shopping, restaurants, and jobs. We were able to show this could happen all within a quarter or a half a mile of walking, while making the majority of residences affordable. So cars will not be needed. Walking, biking, and transit will be the dominant mode, with nature interwoven throughout. The digital backbone for these geodesign capabilities is now being built out to help city officials and planners review and optimize master plans and meanwhile plans, ensuring that their vision can become a reality. And here's a peek at some of the early prototypes showing 3D virtual scenes from a master plan, demonstrating the thematic views of the mixed-use redevelopment on the left, with more of a realistic representation on the right. These are early rules. We can take the design guidelines plan for the city and actually represent it how it would look. But this is just a prototype at the beginning here. But then we can better communicate our design intent is the objective. And we can also look at how the various streetscapes might look and feel, again, backed with performance metrics like carbon sequestration, air quality improvements, runoff reduction, heat island reduction. Everything you see here has data behind it. It's not just a picture. Every tree, every median actually calculates the value that it can provide. So taking this a step further, the 3D models can quickly generate supply and demand calculations such as energy and water use, waste production, and even energy production if you install solar on the rooftop. And we can calculate those impacts for various materials as well, for the walls and windows, glazing. And all of this can be added up so that you can actually plan ahead and see the impact of that plan before building. So like I like to say, you can make your mistakes in the digital world and not in the real world. And all of these data can be easily shared using dashboards, so leaders can examine the impact by the numbers, the quantitative impact of the various design scenarios, helping to make better, more informed decisions. Or these can be used to communicate exactly how those decisions are being made, again, with the public and key stakeholders. There's a real value in this, looking at the way the world is operating, the way it could operate, and your progress against those goals and targets. Or they can share the 3D virtual city itself with the public and let them compare plans or zoom in to leave comments on anything. They can click on any building, get details, or make recommendations or suggestions of any particular element, all from the safety of their own home, which is, kind of what we have to do these days with COVID. So having said all that, I've listed some of the benefits of geodesign, and there are many. So there's just a few here, but for me, the biggest one are the creative leaps that can happen when you bring diverse teams together to solve common problems. That's when the innovation happens. You have these innovative leaps out of the many different views of a single problem. And I think that's what we need more now than ever. New ways of seeing and new ways of thinking that allow us to rapidly prototype and adapt our cities to meet current and future challenges. So with that, thank you.
Stuart, you're on mute. Still can't hear you. I can hear you now.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stuart Patrick. I'm the Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. And I guess I'm here to give if you like, a perspective that might not be entirely climate change friendly, because occasionally I'll say there are some hesitations about the way in which policy might be implemented. So I'm going to give a bit of a balanced perspective on this from a couple of angles. First of all, just a little bit about why the Chamber of Commerce takes an interest in the climate change agenda. Secondly, a little bit about the major drivers in a city economic strategy that have close association with climate change agendas. And then a little bit, I thought I might take a wee wander into the Glasgow Connectivity Commission, on which I was a commissioner when we were looking at the transport issues, much of which, of course, is important to the climate change task. So, first of all, just to say, Chamber of Commerce, we're a membership organisation. We are a civic organisation. We've been around for 237 years. Our primary focus has been international trade. You might regard us as classic globalisers. We are fundamentally supportive of international free trade. But our core mission is to support our members in the growth of their businesses and to champion our city in its economic growth targets. Of course, I recognise that in a lot of the discussion around climate change, one of the slogans quite often is planet before profit, as if there is an inevitable clash between the two. And occasionally there is. It's quite hard if you're in the oil and gas sector, which of course is very important to the Scottish economy and to the Glasgow economy. It's quite difficult to see that transition from anything other than a threatening perspective. I'm sure those in Shell and BP and others will show us exactly how they're tackling that. But it does mean there are some fundamental questions to ask about the industrial structure of your country and your city for some sectors. However, most businesses are driven by consumer demand or by investment opportunity, and consumers, as they change their requirements, they change their demand habits, will drive businesses to follow that. In many respects, that's exactly what's happening. I certainly find within the business community in Glasgow that responding in a way that matches the expectations of consumers for businesses to handle climate change responsibly is indeed one of the most significant parts of changing business interest. But so too is the investment opportunity, that all the opportunities that arise from investing in technology and business practices that are more sustainable is a key driver, and obviously in many cases links back to the research and development base that you have in your city. But there's also an obvious cost reduction measure. You'll have seen in the charts that were being shown earlier about the progress that cities are making, that one of the biggest contributions to the decline in emissions was coming from industry response, because inevitably it is about reducing the waste from energy and the costs associated with that. But as I said, not every policy put forward with a green hue on it is enthusiastically welcomed by the membership that I have to listen to. So let me just say a little bit about some of the things that as a community, as a business community in Glasgow, that have been really important in our thinking. Stella was mentioning earlier the role of the circular economy. Glasgow Chamber of Commerce connected with the circular economy about 5 years ago. We're particularly enthusiastic about the circular economy because inevitably the ability to reduce waste does reduce cost and therefore increased profitability. That's kind of obvious. We carried out with, sorry Jacobs, but we carried it out with Circular Economy Amsterdam, a circle scan about 5 years ago of Glasgow, asking which sectors were the ones where we felt circularity could have some of the greatest impacts. Construction came out as one of the most significant, so too did broader manufacturing, especially food and drink for our city. Construction is one that perhaps doesn't get as much discussion as we might hope it would, as we consider, well, why do we build buildings for 25-year lifespans? Why are we not building buildings that have the 100-year lifespans that perhaps our Victorian ancestors would have considered likely? To what extent are we able to understand the financing mechanisms behind construction that affect the lifespans that businesses are expected to have? And I agree with everything that Stella said about the mechanisms for understanding how a circular economy model should work. It's not just about waste recycling, it's about design. So to what extent is the construction of our cities going to consider that the lifespan of buildings, the adaptability of buildings, the ability to deconstruct a building and use it more flexibly in future years. All of these are questions that don't just require construction response, they often require design professional response, and they often require, as I said, finance professional response as well. We've also been working with Zero Waste Scotland intensively over the past 3 or 4 years, especially in conversation with the small business community, understanding how the circular strategy, the circular approach can work for small companies who are particularly keen to try and find market advantage to respond to changing consumer demand. Some of the obvious ones that come up all the time have been things like bread to beer, and that's one that's quite common. And in Glasgow, we did the same thing with bakeries connecting to breweries. That's the sort of thing that small businesses can find a route into. But we've also worked with some of the institutions like the St Enoch's Centre on some aspects of food and drink recycling, on with the Scottish Events Campus, on asking how do you do major events in a way that has a more circular approach. But we also appreciate that it's absolutely essential that we have a systematic approach to this. So we have asked the OECD to work with us on calculating Glasgow's current circularity gap so that we can target more clearly the priorities, both for industry and for the city, in developing the right circular responses. So circularity is fundamentally important to us as a business community. It is extremely popular with the membership, and in fact held a session day before yesterday with Accenture targeted at the corporates, asking questions about how individual corporates within the city might adopt more circular responses. Let me just talk a little bit about our experience with the city in debating a major issue around climate change, and that would be transport. I was invited by the leader of the council, who I know is coming up earlier, to join the Glasgow Connectivity Commission, initially with a remit looking at congestion around the city centre, which proved ultimately not to be the issues. Congestion wasn't really the issue at the city centre. Actually, congestion on our motorways was more of an issue. But it was an interesting example of where different attitudes towards the climate change issue come up. Glasgow as a city is a highly decentralised city. We went through 40 odd years of policy deliberately to decentralise both population and industry from a compact city into a fairly widespread geography that was built almost entirely around the car. Our transport investment in public transport over a good 40 years was comparatively minimal. So as a consequence, we are left with a city that depends on quite distant travel from surrounding towns and communities into a concentrated employment centre in the city. That's not something you switch off overnight. So I know we had lots of debates about the role of active travel, for example. Absolutely vital that we do have active travel, but you're not going to get an awful lot of impact if the average distance that a cyclist is prepared to travel is about 4 to 5 miles, and you're talking about a regional economy that's over 20 to 30 miles. So actually we have to ask questions more about fundamentals. How do we shift more of the population back into the city, reconcentrate city centre, redevelop city centre living as a practical alternative for the public? To what extent did we absolutely do need to invest in public transport? And we ultimately came to the conclusion that that meant both a commitment to improving the experience of the bus industry's offer in regional Glasgow, because if we didn't get that right, then the access of the poorest communities to the job opportunities was significantly constrained, and employers are as concerned about that as about anything else. So bus service investment and priority bus lanes and so forth was strongly supported, but so too was investment in metro systems as a means of offering an alternative, particularly when you've designed a transport mechanism system that takes folk into a city centre and then takes you out from the city centre in a hubbing model out to the destination you actually want to go to. That means that at the moment, if you want to travel across the region, it's actually really difficult. You end up doing the kind of 2-bus journey that quite often doubles your journey times. These things become really important in making the policies work. And as a consequence, we're concerned not just about how those systems work, we're also concerned about the end results that we have. The comment about the city centres design, absolutely fundamental to what so many of the businesses operating in consumer markets absolutely wanted to hear. Pedestrian experience, concerned about the extent to which concentrating on how buses can travel quickly through cities actually to some extent might have a problem stored up in terms of making the pedestrian experience inside the city centre better. So not always as straightforward to get the policy choices right. And here's where some of that caution comes into play, where you're finding conflicts within the business community about what you're trying to do. One of the key lessons, the time ordering of policy interventions. Yes, let's invest heavily in public transport, improve the buses, get the metro system in place. And let's do that first before we start reaching for policies like workplace parking levy, which in essence mean that you're asking people to switch to the 2-bus journey if you want to get to your manufacturing site or your construction site or your office site if it's not based in the city centre. Extremely unpopular workplace parking levy with the members, but it needn't be a first policy option. Get the public transport investment right, and then workplace parking levy may very well be the right thing to do. And often the conflicts that we were finding in the debates come between not just commuter travel, but also discretionary travel, the extent to which a lot of businesses in hospitality and retail, which are obviously the ones really struggling just now, were concerned that if we were to drive private transport access out of city centres, they were really worried about displacement or encouragement of incentives for developing investments for out-of-town shopping, out-of-town offices, out-of-town hospitality, and therefore simply a displacement of demand. So that's when the ordering of policy seems to be so heavily concentrated on by the business members that I have to listen to. Also, there are some fundamental issues about clash of market realities that come out as well. We are obviously saying to ourselves, well, great, perhaps we might reduce air travel as a consequence of COVID-19. But if you're Glasgow, or for that matter, Edinburgh, our air travel in a geographical zone that we happen to be in is pretty fundamental if you want to carry out international trade, especially if you're a service sector-based economy. And if we assume that, well, we're going to reduce international tourism and we're going to reduce domestic demand for international travel, that in turn means we are going to equally reduce business demand or the opportunities for business demand, simply because there will be less routes and we'll become more dependent on hub airports at Heathrow or Amsterdam in order to be able to operate, which in turn probably encourages more investment in London and Amsterdam. So concerns about what investment choices will be made if we assume that it's necessarily a good thing that air demand is reduced in a city like Glasgow or in a city like Edinburgh. Also the arguments about local supply versus international trade. Again, we are quite heavily dependent on international global supply chains, and we may see from COVID-19 the opportunity to reshift some of those global supply chains, but a lot of our businesses, particularly in engineering, life sciences, whisky industry, depend heavily on those international networks of trade. To what extent are we going to expect that to shift radically in short order? And of course, COVID-19 opens up all sorts of other issues for us. The role of city centres I've just been describing under the Connectivity Commission, does that change simply because of demand for office space in city centres, because of online working? The role of international trade and the role of tourism in a city like Edinburgh, how much of a change are we therefore going to have to make to that? And also changes in the labour market. one of the consequences of COVID-19 might be a huge increase in the pace at which businesses invest in artificial intelligence in order to reduce their dependency on labour, bluntly. And as a consequence, to what extent are we going to see that shift towards the robots economy happen faster in cities that are unprepared for it? So quite a lot of questions that are I'm finding as I debate with members on a daily basis coming out of both the climate change issue and COVID-19. And we look forward with absolute fascination to how COP26 will have an impact on us as a city in Glasgow when it comes to town, in whatever form it does come later on next year. But as I say, I think the fundamental drivers, in summary, from business community to support sustainability do come from customer demand, they do come from cost reduction, so business can be a very important ally in delivering on climate change. But how you deliver those policies, the order in which you deliver them, and the manner in which they're delivered can have an impact on how wide that support is amongst the business community. And I'll stop at...
Thank you.